Margaret Ellis had always believed that love was measured in quiet endurance. 42 years of marriage to Thomas had taught her that. She'd met him in 1981, when they were both junior accountants at a mid-sized firm in Boston. He was charming, ambitious, with a laugh that filled rooms. She was sharp, quick with numbers, and unafraid to challenge bad ideas in meetings. They married young, bought a colonial house in the suburbs, and when their daughter Claire came along, Margaret made the choice so many women of her generation did. She left her career to raise their child and manage the home. Thomas rose steadily, senior partner, then managing director. The money came in waves, enough for private schools, European vacations, a second home on Cape Cod. Margaret handled everything else: the grocery lists, the doctor appointments, the school fundraisers, the holidays that ran like clockwork. Thomas would come home late, kiss her on the cheek and say, "You make all this possible, Mags." She believed him. She believed it was partnership. Their son Evan arrived 6 years after Claire. He was a quiet boy, sensitive, good with computers. Margaret homeschooled him through a difficult middle school year when bullying got bad, then drove him to coding camps every summer. Thomas attended the graduations and recitals, always impeccably dressed, always proud. Family photos showed them smiling, 4 people who looked, from the outside, unbreakable. Thomas died on a Tuesday in October, a massive heart attack while driving home from a client dinner. The car drifted into a guardrail on the highway. He was 68. The medical examiner said it was instantaneous. Margaret received the call at 11:17 p.m. She remembers the exact minute because the kitchen clock was ticking too loudly as the state trooper spoke. The funeral was held 4 days later at St. Mary's, the church where they'd been married. Margaret wore the navy dress Thomas always liked, the one with the subtle pearl buttons. She stood at the entrance greeting mourners, her hands steady even as her heart felt like wet paper. Evan, now 36 and a senior software architect in Seattle, flew in with his wife and 2 small children. Claire, a pediatric nurse in Portland, arrived alone. Her divorce had been finalized the previous spring. They flanked Margaret like bookends, and for a moment she felt anchored. The service was dignified. The eulogy spoke of Thomas's integrity, his mentorship, his generosity. Then Evan stepped to the podium. He was tall like his father, same broad shoulders, same deliberate way of speaking. "There's someone here today," Evan said, voice catching, who meant more to Dad than most people know. Someone who was there for him in ways the rest of us couldn't always be. He paused, looked toward the front row. "Elena Voss, would you stand?" A woman rose, mid-40s, sleek auburn hair, tailored black dress that fit like it had been sewn onto her body. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, nodded graciously, and sat again. A ripple went through the congregation, curious glances, whispered questions. Margaret felt the floor tilt. Elena Voss, Thomas's executive assistant for the last 18 years, promoted 5 years ago to special projects director. Margaret had met her dozens of times at company events, always polite, always a little too polished. Evan continued. Elena supported Dad through the hardest stretches, the mergers, the market crashes, the nights he couldn't sleep. She was family to him. He choked on the last word. Margaret's fingers went numb around the program in her lap. Family. The word landed like a slap. After the burial, at the reception in the church hall, Elena moved through the crowd with ease, accepting condolences, hugging Evan, even kneeling to speak to Evan's children. Margaret watched from the edge of the room, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. Claire came up beside her. "Mom, who is that woman?" Claire whispered. "I don't know anymore," Margaret answered, and the honesty of it startled them both. Weeks later, the will was read in the oak-paneled office of Thomas's estate attorney, Harold Grayson. Margaret, Claire, Evan, and Margaret's stomach lurched when she saw her. Elena Voss were all present. Harold cleared his throat and began. The house in Weston, the Cape Cod property, the investment accounts, the life insurance, everything. The bulk of an estate, worth just over $8 million, was left to Elena Marie Voss. Margaret received a modest trust for living expenses, enough to cover taxes and utilities, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle she'd known. Claire and Evan were each given $100,000 in sentimental items. The language was clear, in gratitude for unwavering companionship and support in my final decades. Margaret stared at the document until the words blurred. Claire gasped audibly. Evan sat stone-faced, eyes forward. When Margaret turned to him, he met her gaze briefly, then looked away. "You knew," she said quietly. Evan exhaled. "Dad talked to me about it last year. He said he wanted to be fair. Elena, she was there for him, Mom, in ways you weren't always." "In ways I wasn't?" Margaret's voice shook. "I was there every day for 42 years. Evan shrugged, almost apologetic. "You had your own life. The garden club, the library board. Dad said Elena listened to him." "Really listened?" Claire stood up abruptly. "This is insane. We're contesting this." Elena, who had remained silent until then, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft, cultured. "I understand this is painful." Thomas anticipated resistance. He left instructions with Harold should there be a challenge. Margaret didn't hear the rest. She walked out of the office into the crispy November air and stood on the sidewalk until Claire came to get her. That night, alone in the house that was apparently no longer hers, Margaret couldn't sleep. She wandered into Thomas's study, a room she'd rarely entered in recent years. His desk was immaculate, as always. She opened drawers methodically. In the bottom one, behind old tax folders, she found a locked metal box. The key was on his old key ring, still in the bowl by the front door where he'd always left it. Inside were USB drives, labeled by year, and a stack of printed photos. The photos first: Thomas and Elena in Paris, in Santorini, in Aspen. Thomas laughing in a way Margaret hadn't seen in decades. Elena's arm around him, possessive, proud. One photo showed Evan, maybe 25 years old, standing with them at a vineyard, glass raised in toast. On the back, in Thomas's handwriting, "The three of us finally." Margaret's hands trembled as she plugged in the earliest drive. 2008, emails, hundreds of them. Love letters, really. Plans for weekends away while Margaret thought he was at conferences. Photos of a condo in Florida bought in Elena's name. Bank transfers labeled consulting fees that matched deposits into accounts Margaret had never seen. She worked through the night, copying everything to her own laptop. By dawn, she understood the scope. For at least 17 years, Thomas had maintained a complete second life. Properties titled to Elena, offshore accounts. Company funds quietly diverted, bonuses to Shell, entities that funneled money to her. All while Margaret balanced the household budget, clipped coupons when investments dipped, sold her mother's silver to help Evan with grad school. She called her old college roommate Susan, now a partner at a white-collar litigation firm in Boston. "I need a forensic accountant," Margaret said without preamble. "And a good divorce, no estate lawyer. I think Thomas committed fraud." Susan didn't ask questions. "Come tomorrow. We'll start." The next months were a blur of discovery requests. Depositions, late nights with spreadsheets. The accountant, a meticulous woman named Priya, traced over $2 million in diverted funds, enough to prove undue influence and breach of fiduciary duty. Elena's special projects role had been a sham. She'd never managed a real project in her life. Evan refused to cooperate. When Margaret asked him to testify about when he'd learned of the affair, he said, "I'm not getting in the middle of this." Dad made his choices. He flew back to Seattle and stopped answering her calls. Claire stayed. She took leave from her job and moved into the house temporarily. Together they boxed Thomas's clothes for donation, sorted decades of accumulated life. In a suitcase in the attic, they found more: birthday cards from Elena to Thomas, plane tickets, a velvet box containing a diamond necklace Margaret had never seen. The case went to probate court in late spring. Elena's attorneys argued that Thomas had been of sound mind, that his gifts were voluntary. Margaret's team presented the paper trail, emails where Thomas instructed accountants to root through the usual channels, falsified invoices, transfers timed to coincide with Margaret's hospital stays or family crises. The judge ruled in Margaret's favor. The will was invalidated due to fraud and undue influence. Assets were restored to the marital estate. Elena received nothing beyond what she could prove were legitimate. Salary and bonuses, far less than she'd expected. Reporters caught the story. Executives' double life exposed after death. Margaret refused interviews, but Elena's tearful denials made the tabloids. In the aftermath, Margaret sold the Weston house. Too many ghosts. She bought a small condominium downtown, walking distance to the Charles River. Claire helped her decorate. Bright colors, modern furniture, nothing that reminded her of the colonial. One evening in early autumn, Margaret sat on her new balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the water. Claire had gone back to Portland. Evan still wasn't speaking to her, and Elena had apparently moved to Florida with whatever she'd managed to keep. Margaret thought about the years she'd spent making herself small to fit. Thomas's vision of a wife, the career she'd abandoned, the dreams she'd deferred. She opened her laptop and enrolled in an online certification program, financial forensics. At 67, she was starting over. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry, Mom. Can we talk?" It was Evan. Margaret stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back, "When you're ready to see the whole truth, I'll be here." She hit send, closed the laptop, and turned off the light. Outside, the city hummed with possibility. For the first time in decades, Margaret felt the rhythm was hers alone to follow.